Today, I want to instantly react, sort of, to the first day of college football on Saturday, and I want to talk a bit about how Oklahoma is extremely thin on the defensive line, and all that's coming up after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You gotta help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college football related, sports related. We have a good time. We live stream on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 o'clock. It's real college football heavy. Every now and again, throw in some EPL, throw in some NFL, throw in some NBA because I love those sports too. And this is a sports talk show, even if I spend a lot of time on college football and recruiting. And then yesterday, we had our first slate of sorts of college football Saturday, right? Starting with Marshall stomping a mud hole in Eastern Kentucky and walking it dry. Now, FBS versus FCS, 85 scholarship players versus 65 scholarship players, but you get the point. 59 points, 0 points given up by Marshall. They put up 625 yards, which is the most anybody's put up since, LSU put up 619 on Clemson in the national title game, which means that LSU put up over 1,300 yards in its final two games in 2019. Just wild stuff there. Then we saw Army be Army, right? Even with Christian Anderson not necessarily being the best at that position that we've seen, my man Kelvin Hopkins still got that for me. Ahmad Bradshaw was awesome too. Actually, many people might argue that Ahmad was a better flex bone quarterback, but Kelvin's got my whole heart, and Kelvin understands that. He understands why. But 42-0 against Middle Tennessee. The dude they threw out there at quarterback in Asher O'Hara, they chart like Ross Tucker's on the broadcast comparing him to Jalen Hurts because he rushed for 1,000 and threw for 2,600. I'm going, not even in the same ballpark, and I'm not a Jalen Hurts stan, and y'all know that. And they had to give that kid the hook. Army wins that game 42-0. In the afternoon, we saw you don't just walk into Wacker Field without a big stick and expect to score. Anyway, Southern Methodist won that game 31-24. Shane Buechele threw for over 300. They look good. Spavital's squad looks like they're going to be able to give somebody some problems out there. I like the way that McBride was running around for his life, but it's a good way to start for them, for the Bobcats. I understand that there's some Bobcat fans in there. Outside of like Alexis Texas and Lyndon Baines Johnson, y'all don't have a lot to be proud of, but San Marcos and stuff. Southern Methodist going out challenge, I think, a Memphis team for a conference championship. Get to them. But also, Houston Baptist showed up, played well against North Texas in a game that we all thought that they would lose. But last year, Houston Baptist put up a bunch of yards through the air. They were able to do the same against a team that's trying to figure out who it is without Mason Fine. My favorite fact out of the UNT game is that Austin Ahn is 27 years old and a sophomore, which means he's got 2 more years of eligibility, which means he could be pushing 30 by the time he graduates from UNT as quarterback for Seth Luttrell's Mean Green. Now, they also might be in the hunt for a transfer quarterback in a couple of years. Maybe his name is Tanner Mordecai. Maybe it's not. Either way, if Joe Green can end up at UNT, anybody can end up at UNT. Good win for them. SFA giving UTEP everything that it wanted. That was an interesting game for me because I like Trey at quarterback, but I wasn't sure, right? Now I'm a little bit more sure. And then to finish the night, we had Arkansas State versus Memphis. Both universities claim Al Green, which I really enjoy. Blake Anderson getting back onto a football field is a really great story. That man has been through quite a lot in the last calendar year, losing his wife to breast cancer, many of you know, losing his father to a long fight with emphysema in May. He just wanted to be on the sideline coaching up the Red Wolves, and I'm glad he got to do that. Ryan Silverfield looked real good in his debut as the head coach for Memphis. I thought that they might have a problem at tailback without Kenny Gainwell back there. I was wrong. Clark ran for over 100 yards. Brady White still looks like that dude at quarterback, and they're going to be stout defensively. Memphis is a good pick to win the American. Them versus SMU is going to be a lot of fun for me. Garrett Riley being the offensive coordinator at SMU. Yes, that is Lincoln Riley's little brother, probably the better athlete of the two. And we're going to see how this goes, right? Because all things considered, no fans in the stands, or very few fans in the stands for some of these games. This was a good weekend of college football, and it was nice to have it on television. Even as we saw the announcers talk around and through Black Lives Matter, we saw them talk around and through the virus and we had varying displays of where people were mentally on this. I was excited to get there. All right, so now I want to talk a bit about Oklahoma and Jalen Redmond, who my colleague at OUinsider.com reported might opt out, right? But it's not necessarily opting out for the reasons that many others are opting out, because Redmond, who could have been a first-round draft pick with another outstanding year this year, has also been through it in 2020. He had the DUI arrest last month. He also has been battling the COVID. He also has an injury that he wants to rehab and would not be 100% for the season, even though he could play. And he's also battled blood clots throughout his entire playing career, and he's only played so much football, right? This is a guy that came up playing basketball. But he was the best defensive lineman that Oklahoma had available in 2020 after leading the squad in sacks with 6.5. And I want to round this out because losing Neville Gallimore, not having Ronnie Perkins, we think, for the first 4 or 5 games of the season, not having Jalen Redmond, not having Marquise Overton, you're looking at losing 66% of your sack total to start the game against Missouri State. Now, that should be easy for Missouri State, right? Because that's FCS versus FBS. That's a college football playoff team versus a team that just got a new head coach. And if we're looking at data points to try to figure out which teams are going to be good and which teams are going to be bad, new head coaches have not fared well so far in this very tiny sample size of 2020. New coordinators the same, right? 2 new coordinators at Southern Miss. We had an interim head coach at Austin Peay, right? We had a new head coach at Eastern Kentucky. All of those teams struggle. But more than that, K9, that'd be Kenneth Murray Jr., who was drafted in the first round by the Los Angeles Chargers in April. Pat Fields, who is a leader on that defense, right? And I think captain on that team. And then DaShaun White all had 7 sacks total. Ronnie Perkins had 6, and Jalen Redmond had 6.5. That's what you're losing. You also need to really, really take a look at that defensive line depth chart, because not having a Marcus Hicks also does not help you, right? So you're looking at LaRon Stokes, who had half a sack. Now, he plays in a position that doesn't necessarily give itself 2 sacks, but still, half a sack. You lose, again, Neville Gallimore, Marquise Overton. I mean, Troy James went into the portal, came out at Prairie View A&M in January. Like, you're really asking Corey Robertson, you're really asking the JUCO transfers and Perrion Winfrey and Josh Ellison to step up in a big way, because you're an injury away from having to move guys that play outside, inside. This is going to be a year in which I watch Marcus Stripling very, very closely, and you really want him to be great. You need David Ugwebu to be good in the middle, right? You need to have options to throw out there, but you need that outside linebacker position, that Nick Bonito, who had 3.5 sacks last year, to be really good. John Michael Terry, coming back from injury, had a half a sack before being injured. You need him to be really good. Like, as I go down the list of tackles for loss and sacks, like, quite as it kept, K9 had like 17 tackles for loss last year, which is bonkers considering he only had 102 tackles in 2019. And you take a look at what he was as a specimen, you understand. So Oklahoma is going to be up against it with the defensive line all year. And that's before we start to talk about the COVID, right? Because I did a segment yesterday about Tennessee going through the measures that they had to go through, which means quarantining and contact tracing 44 of its players, but that also means they couldn't practice or hold their scrimmage. Oklahoma also plays in a state that has a lot of positive test cases and is in the red, according to the White House task force on coronavirus. So it's not exactly easy to stay away, or you're not exactly getting a whole lot of help to stay away, right? So this is going to be interesting to see how this goes. If Redmond chooses to opt out, and again, we think that he might, this is only going to get tougher for Oklahoma in a year where everything is already tough. But in some ways, that's kind of the way that it's been at Oklahoma. Like, Alex Grinch had what I thought was a great quote, which is to say, our depth chart has not been the same for one single day that I have been at Oklahoma. It's just been the way that it is. Guys are going to have to play in a big way in 2020. All right, that's it for me. Deuces.